you know. I used to tell everyone my father was a drug dealer, so we just kept moving around a lot, you know.
What did your father do? He was in the Air Force?
He was a drug dealer, no. My father was in marketing, and we just moved around a lot. He kept advancing, and my father's a genius, and he kept advancing and taking different jobs. And unfortunately, living in the American dream, sometimes the kids, you know, get affected by it. You know, that's what happened.
When did you move to Israel?
Okay, so after I graduated college, high school, I went to Israel and with USY. And I spent 6 weeks there, fell in love with it, or 8 weeks, or whatever it was. And then I said, okay, I want to go to school here. So I went to Tel Aviv University in my junior year. And then I'm like, this is my home. I'm not leaving. And I graduated. I went back to New Jersey, graduated as a writer, and then moved back to Israel. And it kind of was like a yo-yo. I lived in Israel 2 years, and I go back to the States, and I moved back to Israel, and then back to the States. And I did it 3 times. And I left Israel in '91 accidentally, and I left when I became quite famous in Israel. And I was visiting my parents during the Gulf War. The Gulf War broke out, and people said, "Don't come back to Israel. It's crazy." And you know, sometimes you listen to people and not your heart.
Yeah.
So I moved to California, Beverly Hills.
Tell me about establishing striptease in Israel.
That was very funny. I was a part-time model and, you know, finding my way in Israel, doing all different things, and suddenly I saw this ad in the paper for strippers. And I was actually, the week before, I did a modeling show in my underwear, and I got drunk. They didn't pay. They just said all the food and all the drinks you could eat and drink. So I got drunk and I started dancing around in my underwear, and people said, hey, you should do this. And literally 3 or 4 days later, there was an ad in the paper for strippers in Israel. I'd never had anything like that before. So I met with the owners, and they didn't know what they were doing. They gave me the keys to the club. They said, you're running the club. They had a nightclub in Dizengoff Center, and they had no idea what they were doing. So not only did I take over the entire nightclub, I created Chippendales in Israel, and it took 4 weeks to get off the ground, and it just became huge. At first, you know, it was just like Americans and Anglo-Saxon is what they call it, like Europeans that moved to Israel, and then they told their friends, their Israeli friends, and Israeli friends told their Israeli friends, and it just became a huge, huge hit. We used to have the president's wife come a lot to the shows.
Who was the president at that time?
Nivon. It was just huge. It became very huge. They used to call me the Tachat Shel Medina, the ass of the country, and it was amazing. I mean, I was in gossip columns, I was on TV, I was on radio, I was in newspapers. It was so new in Israel that cameras and photographers and every show, like huge press came and just took pictures. And in Israel they don't have really censorship in the newspapers, so it's more like, you know, sexual cells. So I mean, I have a huge album like this of articles from the newspapers and stuff like that, and it was just an amazing experience. I would do it again, like in a heartbeat. I also created, I was the first one to create, you know, I said, okay, what a night for the soldiers, or what are we going to do for a night for the soldiers? I did stuff that was popular in America that Americans would laugh about, but you're talking about 89, 90 in Israel, and Israel was kind of behind. So I did wet t-shirt contest, I did erotic eating banana contest, I just did crazy stuff, and people loved it, and it became hugely popular.
And was there a different attitude between the Israelis and the Anglos to striptease?
Just, no, in the beginning, just because, you know, Israelis were like, people used to write stories. There used to be papers in the stories. A woman went to the club and her husband beat her up, or someone broke off their marriage because the mother-in-law was seen at a strip show, at one of my shows. I mean, all these articles made the paper. Other people stopped me in the streets and told me their fantasies. I've never was a stripper before. I never saw a strip show before, so it was my idea. I wrote a different show every week, and it was funny because in America you think, what's a strip costume? A policeman, a fireman, a construction worker. Well, construction workers in Israel are Arab, so that was taboo. Policemen are not respected in Israel, so you couldn't dress as a cop. So I wrote different fantasies and got different costumes every week. We worked with the costume designer, and every week we had a different show. And people would sit there and tell me, that ladies would just stop me in the street, tell me their fantasies. Guys, it got to the point where guys would wait up on the roof where the parking garage was for their wives. And, you know, we let guys in at 12 o'clock. And then I did something. I went to the Madonna School of Advertising, which means as long as your name is in the paper, it really doesn't matter what they say. So I wrote Men Get Them While They're Hot. And Namat, which is a women's group, protested. So that caused more controversy. Right. I dressed as a rabbi in one strip show. I stripped as a yeshiva bucher. And that went all over the press. So I went to that. I was a young kid, and you know, I did crazy things like that. And you know, I did it as a joke. I thought it was funny. So did other people. In hindsight, some people could be offended by some of the stuff, but it was cool. You know, it's.
How long did you do this for?
I did it till when I left Israel in '91, and then I came here, and then I stripped here for 12 years, 13 years.
Wow.
I did over 3,000 shows, and it was a great way to make money. It was a great way. I think if you could do it and you're not embarrassed, I think it's great. I think I'm not ashamed about anything I did. I think it's part of me, and you know, some people do need. Some of the girl strippers need drugs or alcohol to do it. Right. I didn't need anything. I was alcohol and drug free. I just did it because I wanted to do it.
Now, were you stripping mainly for women or for men?
All for women. Bachelorette parties, you know, and it was funny because, you know, I mean, sometimes they did mixed parties where the husband would hire me for his wife's birthday, stuff like that. But it was 3,000 parties and all women.
So how do you think all that work affected you?
I think I'm pretty free. You know, nothing phases me. I think, you know, you have to be clear in your head what it was about. I was a stripper. I was an exotic dancer. I did everything because I wanted to do it. You know, you hear people, I wasn't porno. I didn't do porno movies. I did stripping. I made people feel good. I take the 300-pound lady and lift her up over my head. You know, her husband or boyfriend, if she has one, never paid attention to her.
Right.
I did that. I turned it on the audience where I said, okay, I'm going to make you feel good. And that's what I did. You know, a lot of times strippers are like, look at me, love me, love me. I turned it on the audience, and that's why they love me.
Right. And why did you quit?
I think it's time to quit before guacamole gets thrown across the room.
Yeah.
I think some people know how to have to retire gracefully. Ball players or
right.
actresses, and I just realized that that's the time. I think, you know, I hit 40. I did 3 shows when I turned 40 just to say I'd stripped when I was 40.
Yeah.
And quit. I think let somebody else take over it, you know?
And how did you get into the Sababa parties?
That's an interesting story. I was a personal trainer for very high-end celebrities and clients in Beverly Hills, and just everyone was so depressed. Oh, there's no one to meet in LA. I can't meet anyone. I'm so lonely. I have no friends. So I got so tired of it. I said, okay, I'm going to create parties. And I did. I had no idea what I was doing. The first party, I lost thousands of dollars. The second party, thousands more dollars. And then I learned what to do, and it was a self-taught business. I believed in it. People were like, you're crazy. You lost all this money. How could you keep doing these parties? And I said, I believe in them. And if you believe in something, you stick with it. And it's now been 6 years, and they're very successful. We had one marriage from it, and it's a funny story.